Good morning. Welcome to our coffee hangout Tuesday morning, every Tuesday morning at 6:30. Hope everybody's doing well. Today I want to talk about the conversation of us suffering in our marriages or relationships and what we can do about it. So for so many of us, the issue is that there's constant pain that's being brought up inside of the relationship. A lot of the pain is self inflicted, but we are able to point the finger and say, like, man, it's definitely somebody else's fault that I'm feeling this pain. Um, and the feelings inside of there, because we do that, end up creating a disconnect and a situation where you feel lonely and like there isn't an answer, like I can't do this anymore, right? And as you start feeling those kinds of things of anger, and in some situations, there's definitely scenarios where it is somebody else and it's not just you causing your own um, scenarios. And so, yeah, in those situations, we feel even more powerless, like we can't change what's going on and we don't really have answers to how do I stop this feeling of being in a marriage or a relationship where I'm suffering. And as our body starts asking that question, we start finding all of our vices, right? And in marriages, there's different things that go on. People turn to overeating, you know, different avoidance things. People turn to alcohol, to other people, other things, pornography, like all kinds of scenarios that people start turning to try to get some relief out of their their marriage suffering, and that doubles down on it, and so that creates an extra added scenario of suffering because now you've you are trying to avoid the suffering, and by avoiding your suffering, the thing that you're using to kill the problem is killing you by accident, right? So we get stuck in it, and it's a circle. um, Most people don't have the answer to what's going on. In fact, the answer usually is quit. The hardest thing about quitting is that's really not the design. That's not how we're made. And so quitting isn't the answer. We'll talk about in the worst case scenarios in a little bit what should be the answer, but for sure it's not quitting. And so that's probably the starting point is you really need to commit to yourself in a different kind of way. And the way that I think that will be helpful for you being able to commit. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to give you three things that you can look at doing to change your suffering. So I guess if we go into that conversation, where does your suffering come from? Well, suffering can come from these scenarios that are happening, um, and you feel them on the inside, but a lot of it is some of the problems in your relationship, some of the problems in your world. Um, and so that happens, but then how I endure the suffering could also create a second amount of that scenario, the second amount of that suffering. All right, so what's the first thing that you got to do? The first thing that you have to do is I need you to know the difference between when your flesh wants to react and how your spirit wants to react. So the highest version of you actually wants to be able to do these things. The hardest thing is a lot of times you're tapped more into your flesh than you are into your spirit. So the flesh will react in ways that say, I'm gonna reply to what's going on, or I'm gonna try to fix somebody else, right? But the spirit of you, the highest version of you, is going to react, or if you give it a chance, will react in a way that says, I know how to do suffering better, right? And so you're going to need to tap into less of the flesh scenarios where it says, oh, I don't want to do suffering. I don't want to do the pain of this. I need to quit. I need to let go, and more into the spirit. And I think about how we do it with athletes. And so with athletes, a lot of times, like the pain of the training is so much that That's kind of the separation. The person who has that inner strength or that spirit about them that says, I'm not giving up, and is willing to endure whatever the hardship is, gets to see the results, right? So it's important for us to be able to tap into that aspect of us, because if we don't, we do the quitting part whenever we feel the suffering in the flesh. All right. So how do you tap in? One useful thing would be prayer, if you have that in your arsenal. Another thing is to be able to do some journaling. Journaling is helpful for you to be able to tap into the spirit side of you. Meditation is another scenario, right? Being able to read and be a truth seeker, right? Really being able to focus on finding truth more than anything. Those things help to start tapping into spirit, right? The other things, whenever you practice quitting or giving up and suffering, you're just or giving your flesh what it wants, right? To say the next thing that is hurtful. Whenever you practice that, you're just building that aspect of you. Okay, so that's the first thing. Is I need you to know the difference between what's the flesh scenario and then what's the spirit scenario, and how will they react differently. The second thing is for you to be able to learn how to do hard things instead of you avoiding the suffering. We talked a little bit about this when we distinguish between what your spirit wants and what your flesh wants. But instead of you avoiding the suffering, allow that suffering to work on you. So our partner and our children are sent to us as gifts. If we could think about that, um, then we start saying, okay, what am I supposed to be doing in this scenario? Well, if you go back to this athletic idea, the gym model says that actually it's going to be a little bit painful for me to get the results that I want. And too often we pass on that pain of trying to get that will help us to get better. And we want to avoid that suffering by doing things like overeating, drinking, all the things that mean avoid or somehow to numb the pain. We want to do all of those things, and then we have to suffer the consequences of those later. Instead of doing the suffering right now, that means that we strengthen and build ourselves into what it is that we need to be in our own lives, and then also so that we can have a reaction that serves our partner versus a reaction that brings them down or is more hurtful to them. And so our challenge is to be able to learn how to endure suffering in a different way, learn how to do the hard things without avoiding those scenarios. And I think the best way for you to look at that is, one is don't try to numb the pain, and the other part is think of it like going to the gym. There is an aspect of training first, or anything that you've accomplished in your life. If you've built a business, or if you are a boss at work, like whatever those scenarios is, it comes with a certain amount of suffering that you're doing in those situations. And I need you to see that inside of your relationship. And I need you to learn how to do the hard things versus avoiding the suffering that you're experiencing. Okay. The third thing that I know will be useful to you is you're trying to do it alone a lot of times. And there gets a point where we meet our max ability to suffer for this moment of our life. That isn't the time to quit. That's not the time where you say, okay, I give up because I can't do this anymore. What is that time for? It's time for you to join. It's time for you to go get help, right? We do that. We provide those kinds of things in Shine Campus, and we help marriages to get better and to do different kinds of scenarios. We have three levels. We have the ability to share with you and teach you what some of the mistakes are. We have the ability to put you in a master class that will help you to understand how we can make our relationships better. And then we also have a mastermind for marriages that is helpful. And so, but everybody has those things. You just have to find your kind of scenarios where you can actually get help, because there comes a time where the lifting is just too much. Again, if we go back to this gym scenario, if you are going to lift a certain amount, you need a spotter. You need somebody there that will make sure that if it gets too heavy, they have a hand to help you up a little bit, right? So It doesn't make you weak to have a spotter. It actually makes you stronger because it gives you the confidence to lift the things that you're lifting or get through the lift so that you can be stronger to do it by yourself eventually. So challenge yourself to go get help or get that partnership or those partnerships that you need. There's tons of different opportunities for you to be able to have help, but you need to be willing to seek that help in those circumstances because sometimes it just becomes too much to bear. All right, I said that I would say, like, what about worst case scenarios? And there's worst case scenarios. There's scenarios where people are facing physical abuse and sometimes emotional abuse that just isn't, um, where that person who is imposing the abusive scenarios is not safe, not doing work to get better, not trying to change at any rate in their life, and is just ultimately super destructive, right? They're a hurricane in a person, right? And if that scenario happens, forgiveness is super important. But forgiveness doesn't mean that you stay in those scenarios or you keep putting yourself in those scenarios. In those harshest scenarios where you see somebody who's unwilling in there, but they are willing to hurt, in those scenarios, those situations need distance, right? And so at that point in time, you create a distance between you and them, right? I don't know that that necessarily means divorce, but it does mean that you need to get yourself to a safe space and all of this without the punishing aspect. So it's not a matter of you trying to become who they are or trying to serve them back. It's just a matter of you saying, look, I could forgive somebody. And at the same time, I'm going to um, protect myself and grow myself in a different environment. Okay. So to me, those things are huge to be able to turn around your suffering in your relationship. I need you to know the difference between what your flesh wants and how your spirit wants to react. I need you to be able to do and learn hard things, even whenever the suffering is happening, without trying to avoid the suffering. And then when it gets ultimately too hard, that's not the quitting time. That's the get help time, and pair yourself and put other scenarios inside of your life that will help you to get through that scenario. In worst case situations, we want to actually do forgiveness and create distance between us and that person who is ultimately abusive. All right, you guys, I hope that you enjoy your rest of your week, and we will talk to you soon.